Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is Corsair's Frame 4000D. Now, I've built in this case a few different times with both the black and white variants of the case with a number of different layouts and setups. So I want to talk to you about my experience with the case and what it's been like to build in, show you the thermal performance of these setups, talk about the highlights and lowlights and the issues I've had, and more. I've done a couple of different build guides that I'll link to in the description, as well as an in-depth sort of look at the black version of this case. But here I thought it'd be worth just talking about a few of the interesting things about it, how flexible it is, and what you can do with it. As you can see, I've mounted it with a few different simple setups and some more complicated ones. So I want to get into depth on all of those things and talk about the intricacies of it, some of the significant flaws, and some of the really nice things, because it is a really nice looking case, and it's fairly easy to construct a really good looking gaming PC with good airflow and decent performance depending on your specs. I'll leave all the specs in the description below of both of these builds so you can find out more, as well as links to those other videos I talked about. But one thing to watch out for immediately is the simple little things like this bottom airflow panel, which I bent on the black version of this case. And that's simply because I didn't remove it during the build process and was leaning on it to sort of plug in some wires to the IQ Link fans, and then found that the pressure that I'd put on it had led to it being bent. It's quite flimsy and really easy to bend out of shape. So I'd highly recommend removing that panel before you start the construction of your PC. That airflow panel does have some nice accessories that you can put behind it, depending on whether you want to be able to see in there, whether you want good airflow and other things. There's a lot of little details to this case and some good attention to detail that Corsair's put into the construction of the case and the logic of how things fit together and what you can do with it. So it's very flexible in a number of ways. Broken down, the case will show you a number of different things about it that are pretty interesting as well. With a riser cable, for example, you can mount your GPU vertically in there by just adjusting the PCIe bracket at the back of the case. And you'll find, obviously, at the rear that we have cable management ties and loops that you can use to tidy things up. I do feel like there's not quite enough room at the back for all the cables, but this is one of the compromises of having a case that supports rear connect motherboards and standard motherboards, that you have to have all those holes in the motherboard tray in order to support both of those things. But it works with ATX, MATX, ITX and EATX motherboards, so a lot of flexibility and support for the different sizes of motherboards, as well as the different formats as well, which is very nice. Other little details include an anti-sag bracket for your graphics card, which you can see mounted here, and you can adjust position of that as well, as I'll show you a bit later on. And this is pretty good at supporting different sizes of graphics cards in the two different positions, depending on what you're installing and how you're setting it up in your case. You see a 5070 here, for example, which is fairly short. There are some things to the case which I wonder why they exist and the point in them. For example, you can remove the motherboard tray from the case, although it is a bit complicated because you first need to unscrew it from the rear. Now, this could be handy if you want to build outside the case, say mounting your motherboard directly to the tray and then putting the tray back in. But there's enough space that you don't really need to do it. And unlike Leon Lee's cases where you could do this, the motherboard tray can't be adjusted in its position in the case or do anything else with it. So it doesn't really seem worth being able to do this, but it's one of the many features of the build. As you can see here in the white version, putting in the rear connect motherboard was really straightforward. I didn't need to remove that tray, so I don't really know why that's an option. There is also this little cover included, which is a magnetic strip which basically slots in to the right-hand side of the case there, covering over some of the holes if you are using a rear connect motherboard to make it look that little bit neater, which is one nice feature. I do like putting rear connect motherboards in this case. It does mean that things look a lot neater, as you'll see, especially with the white build that we'll get to in a second. But you can use a standard motherboard with relative ease as well, and there's still a way to hide your cables thanks to that tray on the right-hand side there. That, of course, depends on whether you're going to keep that tray in place or mount fans there or a radiator, as I'll show you in a moment. The other thing you'll notice here is that it's flexible in terms of what you can do. So you can put a 360mm all-in-one cooler on the front if you like, and you could potentially set it up with push-pull with fans on both sides, although this does highly depend on your GPU length. You can see a 4090 won't fit in there because it's a little bit too long. The 3090 might be more plausible You can see that will just about fit, although the tubes and the radiator might get in the way depending on what AIO you're using. So something to think about there. You can, however, side mount as an alternative, as I'll show you in a second. But I wanted to show some of the different options that are possible. Alternatively, you can do something simple, like put a 240mm all-in-one cooler at the top, as I did with the white version of the build, or a 360mm will easily mount up there. Or you can side mount intake on the side there and still have front intake fans as well. And the options for the front fan setup are pretty interesting because you can see that you can put 200mm fans at the front if you'd like, or be a little bit less bonkers and just use a standard setup with 320mm fans at the front or two 140mm fans. Now with the 200mm fans, I'm using Nock 2 as fans because Corsair sadly don't sell any 200mm fans despite the case supporting it, which is one downside to that. But you'll see when you go to install those, there is a bit of a problem because you have to take out the power supply unit shroud first of all. So this bottom shroud here needs to be removed in order to fit both those 200mm fans at the front. Downside here is it's a little bit fiddly to do that. And in order to do that, you have to remove a load of screws. And then when you put the front fan in, you find that you cannot actually put that shroud back in place. So you do have to sacrifice some parts of the case in order to be able to do this, which isn't necessarily great, but it is something to think about if you do want to do that. Because obviously 200mm fans, massive amounts of airflow, and in theory a lot quieter than the smaller fans as well because they can run at lower RPMs but still push loads of air through there. But you do end up with a build where you can see your power supply unit, and that's not as neat obviously. Although once you put the front airflow panel back on and the glass on, if you've got a black build, it's not necessarily a problem. In terms of storage, you have a little tray at the bottom of the case near the power supply unit, which you can remove. With this tray, you can mount hard disk drives or SSDs to it. You could put two 2.5-inch SSDs on there fairly easily, for example, using small screws to mount it to the rear. You'll see it'll also support hard disk drives as well if you want to use platter drives, but then this just pops back into the bottom of the case and it has multiple positions where it can be put in, either closer or further away from the power supply unit and closer to those front fans, depending on cooling or space for cabling and other things. So some more food for thought there. At the rear, you also have another one of these trays, which sits behind the motherboard. Now, this is removable as well, which is handy in other ways. If you need to access the back of an Intel motherboard to install a backplate for your all-in-one cooler, for example, this is really easy to do because you can remove that temporarily, put the backplate in place, and then put the tray back over the top. This also doubles as an IQ Link system hub port, so you can put that in there, stick that onto that if you want to, if you're not using hard disk drives or SSDs. For a more airflow-focused build, you can remove this cable hiding tray from the side and use this additional accessory which is included in the box, which allows you to mount either a radiator or fans to it. This can then be easily mounted to the side of the case and add additional intake fans to it quite simply, or a 360mm all-in-one cooler, for example. And that, as you can see, can be done when 200mm fans are in place there as well at the front. So you can then take the GPU anti-sag bracket off of the cable hiding tray fairly easily. So the position of this can be adjusted if necessary. Put it onto this additional mounting bracket that's also included as one of the accessories in the box, and then you can put it back in place. Note that it also has this additional rubber that you can put on top of it, which accounts for its position in relation to where the fans are on your graphics card, which is important because you need to mount that with some GPUs, because otherwise you'll find that that is interfering with the fan spinning and then can lead to problems with your graphics card. I actually saw this in the Frame 4500X as an issue. I do think Corsair needs to rethink this anti-sag bracket because it is a little bit fiddly and not as good as other cases I've seen, but it is still a nice addition. Now, in terms of the cable management, as I said, I don't feel like there's a lot of space at the rear. When you've got a rear connect motherboard, it's fine because everything's hidden at the back, but you do have to tidy things up a little bit in order to shut the door on it. With the standard motherboard, this isn't as much of an issue because obviously a lot of the cabling is going to the front as well, but you can see that in either case, it's fairly easy to shut the door and hide that shame away, which is definitely a benefit. I just wish there was a little bit more room there and you might find that you have to manage your cables a bit more effectively in order to do this. Now, in terms of the performance, I thought it was worth just showing a couple of these different builds. So this one is with a side-mounted 360mm radiator, front intake fans, top exhaust fan, rear exhaust fan, and as you can see, 55 degrees C on the CPU, 62 degrees on the GPU. Not bad temperatures there. This is running at 4K as well. I'll leave the specs of both the builds in the description because they are slightly different in terms of what's in there. So that's a 4070 Ti, for example, and an Intel setup. But what we're getting here is a really good temperature out of this case. Now, obviously, maximum fans. Absolutely loads of fans in there. 6 intake fans, 4 exhaust fans, and a really good setup. For a more simple setup, I had 3 intake fans on here, a 240mm exhaust radiator, and a single exhaust fan at the rear. GPU is hotter, but it is a 5070, and this is actually pretty standard with this GPU across multiple cases. But as you'll see, the CPU is still 50 degrees. This is an AMD CPU in this instance, the 9800X3D, so you have to think about the discrepancies in the specs there. But basically, I found that both these setups ran really cool, and it actually shows that you can get away with using the Titan in here, even though it's a smaller one, not a 360, fairly easily. You could put a 360mm in there and get better performance if you're using a higher end CPU, but I wanted to show how this was possible and talk about the wiring of IQ Link in a separate video and other things. And this was a straightforward build that resulted in a quiet PC and one that games really well and looks really good too. Hopefully you found this video useful and all the insights I've given you into what's possible with the case and some of the little complaints they had with it. It's a pretty good case and nice to build in and good in terms of airflow, superior to the 4500X in that regard, but perhaps not quite as nice looking. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos. You might well find them interesting or useful. And most importantly, have a great life.